For 4 decades, National Black History Month has officially celebrated African Americans, both famous and lesser known, for figuratively and literally changing the complexion of our nation. These historic figures are bookmarked by inventions, sometimes defiant stands, others quiet ascension of the corporate ladder. But rarely has the historic spotlight shone on the role African Americans played and continue to play in our nation's transportation system. The year was 1921. African-American pianist Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag blared from the graphophone, and Elizabeth Bessie Coleman is quietly teaching herself French. Jim Crow laws would not allow her to enroll in flight school, so she travels to France, not only becoming the first African-American woman to earn a pilot's license, but to become a daredevil stunt pilot. 5 years later, the Pullman Company emerges as the largest employer of African-American men. Tens of thousands of black men would ultimately work as sleeping car porters or Pullman porters. The pay was better than other jobs afforded to black men. Still, work conditions were degrading. So Pullman porters formed the first African-American labor union, led by A. Philip Randolph. The union would find a stronghold right here in Oakland, headed by C.L. Dellums, uncle of former Congressman and Mayor Ron Dellums. The porters met at what is now the parking lot for Oakland's main post office on 7th Street. By 1930, inventor Charles Banks revolutionized transportation maintenance, inventing a hydraulic jack and release valve. The inventions allowed workers to easily lift a train for inspection and service. His inventions are now used for all transit vehicles. And it was Richard Spikes, an African-American engineer from San Francisco, that spiked bus travel in 1933. Spikes patented the turn signal, automatic gear shift, and transmission. Long before learning why the cage bird sings, Maya Angelou learned why the streetcars ran on time. In 1944, she became San Francisco's first African-American woman streetcar conductor at only 16 years old. Simultaneously, Los Angeles Railway hired its first African-American motorman, Arcola Philpott, or should we say, motormanette. Mrs. Philpott is credited with paving the way for African-American men to join LA's railway. Unforgettable. By the 1950s, it was African-American crooner Nat King Cole serenading the nation, but transportation in the nation's southern states was far from melodic. Buses and trains still carried a colored section, and in 1955, Claudette Colvin of Montgomery, Alabama, resisted that bus segregation, saying, "I didn't get on the bus with the intention of being arrested. I got on the bus with the intention of going home." Her act of defiance actually preceded Rosa Parks by 9 months, but it was Mrs. Parks' arrest that triggered the Montgomery bus boycott. Led by a then little-known minister named Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King convinced 90% of Montgomery's black population to walk, bike, or carpool. The 381-day boycott ultimately reached the Supreme Court that ruled segregated seating violated the 14th Amendment. By 1961, transportation desegregation reached a fevered pitch when 13 civil rights advocates, 7 black and 6 white, launched the Freedom Rides to end whites-only restrooms, water fountains, and bus terminals in the South. Activists were burned from buses and other tremendous acts of violence. Undeterred, their tenacity led the Interstate Commerce Commission to issue regulations prohibiting segregation. By the early 1970s, AC Transit was making transportation history, selecting 20-year-old Wilma Floyd as the first woman of any race to work as a traffic checker. That same year, Billy Ray Kelly became the district's first African-American claims adjuster. A year later, Estella Dillard would become AC Transit's first African-American woman bus operator. By the early 1980s, Dr. Gian Stewart Bluford would become the first African-American astronaut, and Carmen Turner would become the first African-American woman to lead a major transit agency.
You can't touch this.
By the early 90s, AC Transit would select Sharon Banks as the first African-American woman as general manager. As Ms. Banks soared, so did Mae Jemison into the stratosphere as the first African-American woman in space. By the turn of the 21st century, African Americans were still in the skies, making history as the first commercial flight operated by an all-female African American crew. AC Transit honors these first African Americans in transportation. We hope this historic compilation offers a better understanding of why this nation's first African American president calls each builders of the ladders of opportunity.